The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed softly above, bathing the sterile hallway in a cold, sleepless glow. Rain tapped gently against the windows, a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeats of those waiting in silence. Among them sat Grace Whitmore, a woman in her late 20s with pale hands gripping a paper cup she hadn't sipped from in hours. Her long blonde hair was messy from running fingers through it again and again. Her eyes, red from crying, darted every few seconds toward the closed door at the end of the corridor. The ICU. Her father was in there fighting for his life. And the doctors had told her the words no child ever wants to hear. He doesn't have much time. Grace felt her chest tighten. Her father, the only family she had left, had always been her anchor. But what the doctors didn't know was that her father was waiting to meet someone before he could let go, a husband, her husband, the one who didn't exist. It was a lie she had told years ago, a harmless attempt to ease her father's fears that she would be alone forever. He had always worried she was too busy, too guarded, too focused on everyone else to ever let someone love her. So, in a letter she once wrote him on his birthday, she'd mentioned a man. A kind, respectful, loving man who worked hard and made her laugh. She'd called him Michael. Now her father was asking to see him. Her throat went dry as she whispered to herself, "What am I going to do?" Tears pricked her eyes again. She couldn't let her father die heartbroken, thinking his daughter would be alone forever. But how do you introduce someone who doesn't exist? And that's when fate, unpredictable and mysterious, stepped in. A stranger's kindness. The hospital cafe was nearly empty at that hour. A few nurses were grabbing coffee to survive the long night shifts. Grace sat in a corner, staring blankly at the table, lost in thought. She barely noticed when a man's voice spoke beside her. "Excuse me, miss. Is this seat taken?" She looked up. The man standing there was tall, maybe in his early 30s, dressed simply. A black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a charity ID hanging around his neck. His skin was dark, his eyes soft but strong, like someone who had seen more than his share of life's storms. Grace shook her head silently. "No, please. Go ahead." He sat down, setting a stack of files beside his coffee. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. "You look like someone who's been through a rough day." She laughed weakly. "You could say that," he smiled, not prying, just present. That alone was comforting. "I'm David," he said, offering his hand. "Grace," she replied softly, shaking it. There was a short silence, not awkward, just heavy with unspoken pain. Then Grace whispered, "You work here?" "I run an outreach program," he said. "We help families who can't afford treatment." "I was just meeting with a patient's doctor." Grace nodded faintly, her eyes still downcast. After a few quiet minutes, David noticed her trembling hands. "You waiting for someone?" "My father," she whispered. "He's in the ICU." He nodded gently. "I'm sorry. I've been there. Lost my mom 2 years ago. Hospitals. They hold too many memories." Something about the sincerity in his tone made her chest ache. She looked up at him, and in a moment of desperate impulse, she said the words that would change both their lives. "David," she said hesitantly, voice trembling, "I know this is insane, but can I ask you something?" He tilted his head. "Anything." She swallowed hard, tears glistening in her eyes. "Would you pretend to be my husband? Just for one day?" The words hung in the air like fragile glass. David blinked. "Your husband?" Grace nodded, her voice breaking. "My dad's dying. He thinks I'm married. I lied to make him happy, and now he wants to meet him before he goes. Please, I know it's crazy, but it would mean the world to him." David leaned back, processing what he just heard. This wasn't a simple favor. This was a moment, a dying man's peace of mind. And after a long, silent breath, he nodded. "All right. Tell me what I need to know." Grace froze, eyes wide. "You'll do it?" He smiled gently. "If it helps a good man leave this world in peace, yeah, I'll do it." A lie wrapped in Love Room 312 smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers. Machines beeped steadily beside the frail man lying on the bed. Grace's father, Henry Whitmore, once strong, now pale as paper. When Grace entered with David, Henry's eyes lit up. "Gracie," he whispered, smiling weakly. "Is that him?" Grace nodded, squeezing her father's hand. Yes, Daddy, this is Michael. David stepped forward, offering his hand. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Henry chuckled softly. A black man, huh? My daughter's full of surprises. Grace's breath caught, unsure how to respond, but Henry's next words melted the tension. Good? Means she found a man who knows how to fight through the world. David smiled warmly. She's tougher than I am, sir. Grace felt tears rise again. His voice was calm, steady, so natural that it almost made her believe the lie herself. Henry coughed weakly. You two, how did you meet? Grace's lips parted, searching for words. At a bookstore, she began nervously. We reached for the same book, David picked up smoothly, and argued about who saw it first. Henry laughed, eyes twinkling. Sounds like love to me. The air grew still for a moment. Henry reached for David's hand, his voice fading to a whisper. Promise me, son. You'll take care of her. She's been strong too long. David swallowed hard, his throat tightening. I promise, sir, always. Henry smiled faintly. Then his eyes closed. The monitor beeped once, then flatlined. Grace's knees gave out as she broke into sobs, clutching her father's hand. David didn't speak. He just held her, like he had known her forever. Grief and grace, the funeral was quiet. Just a handful of people and a cold wind sweeping through the small cemetery. Grace stood by the grave, tears streaking her face, clutching her father's ring. David stood behind her, silent, his presence steady like the earth beneath her feet. When the service ended, she turned to him. You didn't have to come? He smiled faintly. I told him I'd take care of you. I meant it. Her lips trembled. You barely know me. He shrugged softly. Sometimes you don't need to know someone to care. She looked away, the wind carrying her tears. You lied for me. David met her eyes. I told your father you were loved. That wasn't a lie. Grace's breath hitched. Why did you do it? He looked up at the gray sky. Because when my mom died, I wished someone had done that for her, given her peace. That night, Grace cried herself to sleep, not just for the father she lost, but for the stranger who had shown her the kind of kindness that feels like light in darkness. A second chance at living weeks turned into months. Grace returned to her small apartment and tried to rebuild her life, but the silence was unbearable. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was from David. Hey, Grace, we're starting an art therapy program for kids at the foundation. I heard you used to paint. Could use your help. She stared at the paper for a long time before whispering, how did he know? But she went, and that's where everything began to change. The foundation was small, nestled in an old community center. The walls were filled with children's drawings, messy, colorful, full of hope. When she saw David again, he was laughing with a group of kids helping one fix his paintbrush. Glad you came, he said, smiling. I didn't have much else to do, she admitted. Sometimes that's the best reason, he replied. As days turned into weeks, Grace found herself coming back, not because she had to, but because the place made her feel alive again. David and Grace worked side by side, organizing, painting, sharing stories. And though nothing romantic bloomed, something far deeper grew. Trust. She learned that David had grown up poor, lost his parents young, and built the foundation in their honor. He learned that Grace had given up art school to care for her father. 2 lives built on sacrifice, finally finding purpose again. The unexpected question 1. Evening. As they locked up the center, it began to rain, soft and familiar. They stood under the awning, watching the droplets hit the pavement. Grace turned to him. Do you ever wonder why you said yes that night? David chuckled softly. Every day. And? She pressed. He looked at her for a long moment. Because I saw someone who needed one day of peace. And if pretending gave her that, then it was worth everything. Grace's throat tightened. You changed everything for me, David, he smiled. You changed me too. The rain fell harder, and without thinking, Grace stepped forward, not into his arms, but beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and for a long moment they just stood there, letting the rain wash away everything they'd both been holding inside. The heart of the story. A year later, the community center had grown into something incredible, the Whitmore Carter Foundation. dedicated to helping patients' families heal through art and compassion. At its first public event, Grace stood on stage beside David, her voice trembling but proud. "A year ago," she began, "I met a stranger who pretended to be my husband to grant a dying man peace. But somewhere in that lie, we both found something real." She looked at David, eyes shining. "He taught me that kindness doesn't need blood or vows, just a heart willing to care." The crowd erupted into applause. David stepped forward, smiling. "I just wanted to help someone smile again. Turns out, she helped me remember how." Epilogue. The truth of love that night after the event, Grace sat beside him under the stars. "Do you think my father would approve?" she asked softly. David smiled. "I think he's proud. You turned your pain into purpose." She nodded slowly, then whispered, "You know, I sometimes forget it was all pretend." He laughed gently. "Maybe that's how you know it wasn't." Silence lingered, warm, full, complete. Grace reached into her pocket and handed him something. Her father's gold ring. "He'd want you to have it," she said. "You gave him peace when I couldn't." David looked at the ring, then at her. "No," he said softly, closing her hand around it. "Keep it. It's proof that love, real love, doesn't always start with truth. Sometimes it starts with compassion." Tears filled her eyes, and as the night breeze brushed against them, they both realized their story didn't need titles, vows, or names. It was built on something rarer, human kindness, the kind that doesn't end when the pretending stops. Because sometimes, the most powerful love stories aren't born from romance. They're born from humanity, a stranger's kindness, a daughter's promise, and one day of pretending that healed two hearts forever. The months after the Foundation's launch passed in a quiet blur of motion, paint-splattered afternoons, long evenings balancing grant paperwork, and the constant laughter of children filling the halls that had once been empty. Grace often found herself smiling without realizing it. The heaviness that had lived behind her ribs for years was slowly lifting. Every brushstroke, every shared story, every child's giggle seemed to mend a piece of her that she thought was gone forever. David saw it too. He'd catch her standing at the window, sunlight falling on her face, and think of how grief had once clouded that same face. Now it was alive again. One Friday, after a long day of work, Grace found David on the rooftop garden they'd built for patients' families. A quiet place with benches, flowers and lanterns that glowed softly after dusk. He was sitting there, sketchbook open on his lap. She tilted her head. "You draw?" He chuckled. "Trying to. Thought maybe I could paint something for the children's wing." Grace sat beside him, brushing her fingers against the rough page. "You know what my dad used to say?" "What?" "That the best art isn't what looks perfect. It's what feels true." He smiled at that. "Then this one's going to be very true." They laughed in an easy, genuine sound that made the evening feel lighter. A letter left behind. A week later, Grace received a parcel in the mail, addressed in her father's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope and an old family photograph. The letter read, "My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it back home. But that's all right, because I know you're stronger than you think. And about that husband of yours, whoever he is, I hope he's kind. But even if he isn't real, maybe one day someone will come along who makes you feel like life still has color. Promise me you won't close your heart forever, okay? Love isn't just romance, sweetheart. It's the courage to keep caring, even when it hurts." Dad tears streamed down her face as she folded the letter carefully. When she told David about it, he didn't speak. He simply placed his hand over hers, a quiet gesture that said everything. A new beginning, winter melted into spring, and the Foundation held its first art exhibition. The community center's walls were filled with paintings from children whose lives had been touched by illness, poverty, or loss, each one bursting with color, joy, and hope. At the center of it all hung a large canvas painted by Grace and David together. Two hands, one black, one white, reaching toward each other through a swirl of gold light. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Kindness doesn't ask who you are. It just reaches back." The crowd fell silent when they unveiled it. Then applause thundered through the hall. Grace looked at David, her eyes shimmering. "We did it," He shook his head softly. You did it. I just pretended for a day, she smiled. And somehow that day changed my whole life. The confession later that night. After everyone had gone, Grace and David sat beneath the same painting. The lights dimmed around them. I think I finally understand what my dad meant, she said quietly. About love being courage. David turned to her. And what do you think courage looks like? Grace smiled faintly, like asking someone who saved you once. To stay. The words hung between them, soft, trembling, real. David's breath caught. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but hearing it felt different. He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. Grace, the night I met you, you asked me to pretend. But I stopped pretending a long time ago. Her lips parted. Then don't start now. And when he kissed her, it wasn't cinematic or grand, just simple, human healing. Two souls who had carried too much for too long, finally finding rest in each other. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Whitmore Carter Foundation had grown beyond anyone's dreams. Families from across the state came to find hope through art, therapy, and compassion. A photo hung in the lobby, Grace and David surrounded by children holding paintbrushes. Next to it, a quote from Henry Whitmore's letter, "Love isn't about forever. It's about the moments when you choose to keep caring." Every visitor stopped to read it. Some cried, some smiled, but all of them left a little lighter. On a warm Sunday morning, Grace sat in the garden with David, watching the sunlight dance on the water fountain. She rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever think about that night?" He nodded. "All the time." "If I hadn't asked you," he interrupted gently, "then I'd still be looking for a reason to believe people are good." She smiled. "And now?" He kissed her forehead. "Now I know they are." The wind rustled the leaves above them, almost like a whisper, her father's voice echoing through time. Love isn't just what you find. It's what you choose to give. And as laughter echoed from the children nearby, Grace closed her eyes, knowing her father's wish had come true. She wasn't alone anymore. Neither was David. And all it took was one simple question. "Sir, can you pretend to be my husband? Just for one day?"